Making the number 6, Part 4. This is the final installment of making the number 6 clock. After cutting out the frame on the bandsaw, I used dowels to help me sand all those rounded edges. The moment of truth. You get to see whether you've drilled through correctly and you've lined up your paperwork correctly. Yahoo! It worked! After all that hard work of sanding and cutting, you want to make sure that the pinions are on the right side of the wheel. You want the nice side facing out. I found for myself that I don't need to use clamps for this part of the operation. Finger pressure is all you need. If you use clamps, it tends to squeeze out the glue and starve the joint, and it will pop later on. Before you reach for that spray glue, make sure you wear safety glasses. For some strange reason, I seem to have sprayed myself in the face with the spray glue. You can say I wasn't too pleased about that happening. This is the piece you use for connecting the pendulum to the pendulum bob. When I used hardwood, it just wasn't strong enough. It just split on me. So I substituted it with 1/2-inch Baltic birch and made another one. You're not going to see it. It's hidden inside the pendulum bob itself. The weights that I use right now, they are steel BBs. Use a straight edge for this part. If you don't, your knife will follow the grain of the wood and be all wonky, and you don't really want a wonky pendulum. It's best to test your pendulum with the pendulum rod you just made. If you don't, and you glue it into your frame, and it's a wonky rod, I guarantee you'll be pulling your hair out. Thought I'd finished sanding, but I found some more. I didn't want to get any lacquer or finish inside the arbor hole, so I punched out some insulation foam using the arbor spacers, and then I used that to fill up the hole with so I didn't get any stuff inside it. After spraying the wheels with lacquer, I also cleaned up the teeth again, just in case there was any overspray. I was having trouble pushing the arbor through the arbor hole when it was inside the frame. I pushed it so hard that I busted the frame. So I asked Clayton Boyer. He suggested to get a wax crayon and wax up the arbor. I did that, and when I pushed it down and spun it a few times, it worked. It does take a few goes of waxing and spinning and pushing down, and it works really well. Before I used my expensive wood, I made a Baltic birch mock-up. I found that I couldn't get my hand in the back of the frame, or even a brush back there when it came to staining it. It would just look a big old mess. So I'll stain them and prepare them in separate sections. I taped off the areas I didn't want stain on, and when it came to gluing up the frame, I was careful not to use too much glue, otherwise it gets squeezed out, and I'll just make a big old mess. Be careful for the next stage, you might wreck your frame. The frame is pretty bendy, and you can actually snap one of the arms off. That actually happened to me and I had to re-glue it on. Don't use a hammer to whack that arbor in, even though you're so tempted. You'll just mash the frame up. You'll mash the spacer into the back of the frame and just damage it. It's just too tough to push through. Take it apart, re-wax it and try again. This is one of my favourite parts, blowing on the wheel, watching it round and round and round, spinning faster and faster. It just looks really cool. I use these cards to create a space and a little knobble of arbor to put my spacer on. The back just isn't flexible enough, and it's so hard for me to put it in, so this really helps. Make sure you have your clicks orientated in the right direction, and also that you have the string attached to the pulley as well. Using the mark on the back of the wind wheel arbor, you can see where the flat spaces are, so you can tighten up your grommets on the wind wheel. Remember, when you tighten up the grommets, just use finger pressure only, otherwise you'll strip your thread and the wood. When I was drilling the hole for the 3/4 dowel for the wind-up handle, the drill bit on the end was the only one that worked. The flats are just too big. It just drove me bonkers trying to find the right drill bit for my 3/4 dowel. That drill bit is pretty grabby, so I clamped another piece of wood on top and drilled through it, a bit like a wooden sandwich. Using my cheapo fish scale, I weighed out the weight shell to 6.5 pounds. This part takes quite a bit of time and is very fiddly. Just takes quite a lot of patience. I'd like to thank Clayton for designing this clock. It looks really good on the wall. It's a nice sounding tick-tock. That's the end of the part 4 of making the wooden gear clock, number 6. It was an awesome project. Thanks Clayton for designing it. It really looks good on my wall.